and welcome back to the Reapers. So we did a video a while ago on different air-to-air missile types. They're split into three different categories: semi-active radar homing, which is known as a Fox 1, passive IR homing, known as Fox 2, and fully active radar homing, Fox 3. If you want to see more information about that, then please click this link here for that video. Now for this video here though, we're going to go into a bit more detail about the actual models of missiles that we're interested in. Now we use a simulator called DCS World, and we have loads of missiles available. In fact, over here we've got a full list of the missiles available, air-to-air missiles that we can use. We're not going to look at every single one of them because it's going to take all day, so we're going to look at the main characters that we use and talk about those missiles. We're going to talk about ranges of the missiles. We're going to talk about where those different missiles are used and which aircraft fire them and the homing type of devices they use. Now, talking about the ranges of the missiles, it's very deceiving. If you go into Wikipedia or anywhere on the internet and you look at the range of a missile, it gives you a very strange perception of the range of that missile. For instance, if we look at a gun, like a handgun, just imagine a handgun, you fire it and it's got a range, a certain range, let's say 300 feet. Wherever you fire that gun, more or less, you're going to get that roughly that same range. With a missile, it's the opposite way around. So we're going to take very quickly up here, we've got an AIM-120C. The internet tells us that the AIM-120C has got about 50 to 60 miles of range. Now, as we've proven, yes, you can do that. We've done that shot on DCS World, but your aircraft has to be flying at 60,000 feet at Mach 2 or above and fire that missile at a hostile plane that's Mach 2 or above at 60,000 feet and flying directly towards you, and just doesn't evade, just flies straight into your missile. Then yes, you can do a 60-mile shot with it. But in reality, that's never actually going to happen. And we can also go with that same missile to the opposite spectrum. Say we were supersonic at low level, chasing another hostile who was in front of you, who was running away. In that case, if you fired your missile, it would only have a range of about 4 miles, just over 4 miles. Exactly the same missile, just different circumstances where we're using it. And that's if the hostile didn't avoid. If he did avoid, you would have a maximum firing range of this AIM-120C of about 2.5 miles. So that shows in how almost irrelevant the ranges are when we talk about them. The same missile at higher altitude, 60 miles, down on the deck with a cold dodging hostile at 2.5 miles. But nevertheless, we need some way of comparing them, so we will still talk about the range. Essentially, because of this kind of superfluousness of the range, they're often just split into low range, medium range, and long range. Why don't we start, guys, with the AIM-7. We've got 3 different types that we use: the Foxtrot, the Hotel, and the Mike. What I do know that they are a Fox 1, so they are a semi-active radar homing missile. They are a medium range missile. So when they're fired, then they don't have their own independent radar. They are a slave to the mothership that fires them, their radar lock. So that mothership has to maintain a radar lock from firing all the way till impact.
Starting from the AIM-4C, the top speed is Mach 4 for all variants after that. The weight of all of these missiles is, from the AIM-7F onwards, is 231 kilograms or 510 pounds. The AIM-7F and M have a range of 38 nautical miles.
So again, that would be a kind of in an ideal shot when you're up high, shooting at someone who's hot and you're down low, it would still be just a couple of miles. Yeah. The
only major difference in terms of this sheet here is the warhead is literally 1 kilogram difference. The M has like 1. Well, actually it is. So the F has a Mark 71 continuous rod warhead, which weighs 39 kilos. And the 7M and P have the 40 kilogram WDU-27B blast fragmentation warhead.
What's this rod warhead? What do we know about that?
So I think the way a blast rod warhead works is the explosive detonates and it causes essentially ballistic rods to shoot out in all directions, with the intent that these weaponized rods will impact and tear into the airframe of the aircraft. As they collide, it will do horrific damage. Whereas a blast fragmentation is the thing explodes, shrapnel goes flying.
So these must have started life very early, what, 50s? The AIM-7s must have started?
So there's a bit of an interesting story. Yeah, Sparrow 1 emerged in the 1940s from a US Navy program. In 1947, Yeah, so the first attempt of a radar-guided rocket was in the 1947, which was meant to be a beam rider, which is important because beam riders suck at air combat.
First aircraft it was used on is the Sky Knight.
So the original idea was essentially they took an HVAR rocket and they gave it aerial guidance via beam riding, which they called Project Hotshot. Sparrow 1 was a rather primitive and limited weapon, probably because it was a beam riding weapon. So all the beam riding weapon does is it tries to fly in the beam between the target and the designating aircraft, which doesn't work very well when the aircraft is turning because it gives no lead. Sparrow 2 was introduced as early as the 1950s. Idea was to equip it with an active radar seeker. They were tested on Sky Knights and Sky Lancers, I think.
Developed for the Avro Arrow, which is kind of interesting.
That is interesting.
They were initially developed to be the primary weapon of the Sky Lancer intercept, and as well as potentially being used with the Avro Arrow.
So these weren't ready for Korea then? They were ready for Vietnam, weren't they? Or were they not?
Not quite. It was the AIM-7 Sparrow 3s, which were the Vietnam ones, and I'll go into that in a bit. So Sparrow 3, Raytheon began work on a semi-active radar homing version, which is the Sparrow 3, which is the definitive AIM-7. The first of these weapons entered the United States Navy service in 1958, which would have been what we would call the AIM-7 Sparrow A. The version that was definitively used in Vietnam is what we refer to as the AIM-7E for the most part. It saw extensive use in Vietnam, but had a rather disappointing combat performance, primarily due to a mixture of reliability and poor training due to the idea that for some reason dogfighting training should now go out the window. And the VID rule.
Well, most of the missile kills in Vietnam were Sparrows, so that tells you something.
Although the kill probability was less than 10%.
Wow. So that was a shocking missile.
So to tell you the records from the Vietnam War is listed on Wikipedia. AIM-7Ds fired from F-4Bs, 4 MiG-17s including 2 probables, F-4Bs firing AIM-7Es, 2 Antonovs, 2 MiG-21s, 1 MiG-17. Hang on, this is US Navy specifically. And 1 F4Js using AIM-7E2s got 1 MiG-21. US Air Force AIM-7D, 1 MiG-17, AIM-7E, 3 MiG-17s, 10 MiG-21s, an additional 4 MiG-17s, 2 MiG-21s from the AIM-7E. I don't know which variant that would be. AIM-7A2, 18 MiG-21s, 3 MiG-19s. AIM-7E2, I don't know why. This is a different plane firing it, that's why. Another 8 MiG-21s and 1 MiG-19. So it looks like the Air Force got the majority of the kills with AIM-7 Sparrows.
And they were used through the fighters right up until, and including the 80s, weren't they? With
well, the AIM-7E, the last variant of the AIM-7E was the E4, which was specifically designed for compatibility with the Tomcat. And from that point on, they improved with the AIM-7F in the 70s. And went on to later improvements with the AIM-7M.
The Skyflash is basically a British version of the Sparrow.
Roger.
The AIM-7M is the one that is famous for its use in the Gulf War. The most modern version that was ever produced is the AIM-7P, which is basically an improved version of the M. And there was also a prototype idea that was supposed to be the AIM-7R, which was basically a AIM-7 with a infrared homing seeker, but it was cancelled in 97.
Okay, anything to add to the Sparrow, chaps?
Basically, the most widely used NATO missile around the world, used by the majority of NATO countries and allies, with some exceptions. For example, the French would typically use their own missiles.
Lovely. Right, next we move on to the AIM-120. The Bravo and the Charlie are the ones that we're interested in, otherwise known as the AMRAAM. So what's that? The Advanced Medium Range Air-to-Air Missile, I guess. So this was kind of designed for the whole use of a lot of NATO countries, wasn't it? And is it fair to say it was the successor of the AIM-7 Sparrow, or something developed alongside it?
Well, in many ways, it fulfills the same role. It just does it better, because with the way a 120 works, you use track while scan, right? Which means you can target and shoot at multiple targets while keeping track of them, which gives you so much more capability than Fox 1.
Affirm. So I can lock onto a target with an STT an STT or a TWS track while scan lock. I can fire my AIM 120C, and at some point during its travel it will become Pitbull, which means it will turn its own onboard radar on, because it has its own onboard radar, unlike the Sparrow, and then it will basically reacquire the target itself and track the target itself, at which point your mothership can then turn around and run away. And that's the whole premise of Fox 3 type missiles. So I'm guessing it's going to be a lot more expensive than the Sparrow. I don't suppose we've got any kind of figures on that, though. Certainly a lot more complicated than a Sparrow.
They have SAM versions of it.
SAM versions of it, Roger.
Yes, I believe the designation is typically RIM for naval SAMs.
Roger.
So the whole purpose, I think, of the AMRAAM is obviously to give you improved capability over the Sparrow, but also this is coming out of what were known as the ACE-VAL and the AIM-VAL tests, which were basically tests conducted during combat operation or combat evaluations, such as top, where you would have F-15s with AIM-7s going straight onto aggressor aircraft coming in head-on, and even though the aggressors were shot down by the Fox 1s, in some situations they were able to get within visual using all aspect missiles and get a simulated kill. So in terms of a cost to usage ratio, the cheaper F5s being shot down in the dozens, which would have represented the dozens of MiG-21s many US F-15s would have to face, would actually have a better cost-to-efficiency ratio than the F-15s, because they were just being shot down. And I believe the finding was essentially you needed some sort of weapon that could be fired and track the target without putting the expensive aircraft like your F-14s, F-15s in danger when the aircraft attempted to merge with you, which is where the requirement for an AIM-120 style weapon came in. Obviously, you already had the AIM-50 Phoenix, but Phoenix was designed to shoot down bombers and cruise missiles, not fighters.
So what about dates of the AMRAAM 120 then, Sherman? When was this being developed?
Developed in the 80s and then introduced into service in the 90s.
Right, so in the 80s developed and then in service into the 90s. So it sounds like
deployment of the A began in 1991 and Navy followed suit in 93.
It sounds like it phased out the Sparrow then. So as the Sparrow was starting to die off in usage, it was being replaced by the AMRAAM.
Well, so for example, in Desert Storm, the majority of your loadouts consisted of mostly Sparrows and a couple of AMRAAM, basically because there weren't enough of them to replace them entirely yet.
Roger, that makes sense. Probably difficult things to make and quite expensive, I imagine.
Unit cost for an M120C ranges between 300 to 400,000 US dollars. For the D, it's 1.7 million as of 2014.
Roger. So we don't have the D in DCS because we only go up to the 90s really. Then the C, I understand, is just a wing-clipped version of the B because it was to be used in the Raptor, wasn't it?
Yes, because the Raptor has internal weapons bays, so you need to shove it out the bay first.
The F-16 can carry them on wingtip hardpoints. I don't know about the F-18.
Yeah, the F-16.
F-18 only carries Sidewinders on the wingtips. Operational use. First kill, 1992. F-16 shot down a MiG-25 south of the no-fly zone. Second kill, January 1993, MiG-23 F-16C. Third kill was a Republic Spratska Air Force J-21 shot down by an F-16C over Bosnia.
Well, George, this is an interesting thing we haven't shown. So if you were firing an earlier AIM-7 Sparrow, you have to basically get a full STT lock on the hostile, and therefore the hostile knows that you're shooting at him. So as soon as you pull that trigger, the hostile knows that he's being shot at. With an AMRAAM, you can lock him in something called a track while scan lock, which does not give the hostile a warning that he's being fired on, in which case you could fire an AMRAAM onto a hostile and he won't know basically that he's being fired on until the terminal point when the AMRAAM went pitbull, which could just be just a couple of miles away. At that point he would start getting a warning from the radar's missile. at which point it's only got a few seconds to live. So it's a huge advantage in that case, this Fox 3 format over the Fox 1 format of the Sparrow. Very hard to
yes,
avoid.
the other inherent advantage of using a weapon like that is the weapon will use essentially preemptive guidance up until the terminal phase when it turns on its own radar, which means in theory you don't need to keep track of the target even in track while scan, which allows you to turn away from a lethal situation and run away while still presenting a threat to the enemy, as well as the fact that because you're not single target tracking, you can actually keep up your situational awareness on the radar with track while scan.
A firm, which is very important. Very important not to get target fixation. So, yep, very, very important missile there. Used by a whole bunch of NATO stuff, I guess. F-15, F-16, F-18, Eurofighter, question mark? I think Eurofighter.
Basically, anything west of the former Iron Curtain will be using it, except for the French, because French.
Because French, roger that. Okay, anything else about the AMRAAM before we sign off on that?
Let me see if I can find information on the D. Upgraded version improved in almost all areas, including 50% greater range, better guidance over its entire envelope, and probably kill.
It's interesting. It's got a ramjet engine, which gives it its extra range. But okay, we're not going to go too far into that because we don't get the D and probably never will do in DCS, which is really what we care about. So,
or in real life.
Well, yeah. Okay, so that's fine. Right, next we're going to move on to the mighty AIM-54C Phoenix missile. Sherman, this is your baby. What do you think about it?
Well, the A and C were designed for a very specific purpose, and originally designed with the idea of being used with the F-111B. This thing was meant to go and find a bunch of attacking anti-ship missile carrying planes, like, say, Bears, in conjunction with the AUG-9, track about 6 of them, and fire on 6 of them using track while scan, at ranges up to about, well, at least in the F-14, I think it was 50 miles you could reliably shoot, although the operational range is 100 nautical miles on the AIM-54C. Yeah.
Question quickly, does that mean it was a Fox 3 type missile, like the AMRAAM?
Yes, it is a Fox 3 type missile. The whole idea behind the AUG-9 and the AIM-54, you could carry and launch 6 of these things simultaneously per plane and knock out 6 targets using Fox 3s.
And do we have is there an official range? I know, like we spoke, the ranges aren't that relevant, but do we have an official range of them?
I'm going to say the predecessor to it was the AIM-47 Falcon, which was a missile developed for the YF-12, which is the fighter version of the Blackbird.
Interesting.
So the official range, well, the listed range as operational on Wikipedia is 100 nautical miles. However, from what I've heard of F-14 pilots, you could only really reliably use these things at about 50 miles range.
Well, that's absolutely fine. And one thing we found out, even with our own tests in DCS, which isn't real world, it's just a simulator, is you can have these missiles that fire 100 miles, 200 miles, whatever, but your radar can't actually get a lock that far away on a hostile unless it's a jumbo jet or something. So you could almost say that these ranges are, and I bet that's realistic, Sherman. I bet you can't get a lock on another little scrawny little fight at 100 miles.
Maybe not to the 100 miles, but I do know for a fact, based on that Gulf of Sidra video we mentioned, that F-14s can lock up fighter-sized targets at least up to 72 miles.
Interesting. Okay, let's carry on with it. Mach 5, I believe that's right. That's fast. And
so
it's a loft. It's a loft cover, isn't it?
Well, yes, at that range there's basically no point in not lofting, because you can get the missile up to a much more efficient altitude in terms of air resistance with just how far the missile can go.
Okay.
So there's basically, as far as I'm aware, there's 3 variants that were really used with the F-14 and A. Well, 2 variants of the A with some slightly different manufacturing in terms of the rocket motor, and the AIM-54C, which did have some substantial improvements over the A. Notably, it had some introduction of digital electronics into the missile, and internal missile cooling, which means that you did not have to use the cooling system from inside the aircraft, which also fed the cooling of the radar. And I believe that also allowed for some increased ECM resistance.
Roger, yeah, because it's a Fox 3, obviously it has its own onboard radar. I noticed the diameter is very fat, and it's a thumping great warhead. I wonder why this thing was so fat. Is it just to do the range, to get enough explosive in there to do the range, as in propellant? I guess so.
Yeah, it probably was. I'm pretty sure that the back body is actually the same one that's attached to the AGM-65.
Oh yeah.
If you look at the fins.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's notoriously expensive, more expensive than an AMRAAM.
Literally $1 million missile.
Yeah.
The fins were attached later. The back four that you see are stationary. They always stay on it, but the fins were attached on the carrier deck.
Any
Yeah.
active kills with this? I don't think there was any active kills, was there?
Well, the US certainly didn't get any. There were 2 launched in Desert Storm by F-14s, and I believe both their rocket motors failed.
Roger. I mean, my problem with these whopping great lofting 100-mile missiles is, of course, you can fire them. Even if you could find a way of locking, like at 70 miles, great, and you could fire them and they could kill something. But you couldn't get an IFF at that range. You couldn't tell whether the thing you were shooting at was friendly or foe, and hence you never really can use them. You'd still have to close in close to use your Sparrows anyway. That's always been my problem with these.
The defense role, the F-14s were using Hughes Org 9s with the system, which was integrated with the E2C Hawkeye system. So the Hawkeye would identify on its radar, send via data link, whether it was bogey, friendly, or bandit. And once it was confirmed the identity, you could then use the Hawkeye via data link to shoot this thing. So even if you didn't have radar lock, you would data link shoot these things at the targets. And even if you had to lock them up yourself, you still had them ID'd by your Hawkeye.
Roger, gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. I know they're very big missile, obviously very heavy. Can't remember now, 700 kilos or something like that. I think they were incredibly heavy missile.
1,000 pounds.
1,000 pounds, yeah, okay, 500 to 600 kilos. That's a very, very small car.
To give you an idea, when you see these things when you see videos of these things in the training exercises, the thing literally just drops for a second before it gains enough thrust to actually raise itself up, which I suppose works because it means that the missile won't at the time get.
Interesting. Well, we'll be getting this in not too many months, hopefully, in DCS. So we look forward to using it, like we said, Fox 3, so we can fire it, hopefully, without even warning the target, loft it on someone at 70 miles away. And by the time it goes pitbull and they get a warning it's been fired, then hopefully it'll be too late. We'll have to see. Like we said, it's never killed anything.
But again, this thing is not designed to kill fighters. It was designed to kill either cruise missiles or the planes launching said cruise missiles.
A-firm.
Tu-95s, etc., etc.
A-firm.
There are reports of Iran using these things extensively during the Iran-Iraq war. However, of course, those reports are still sketchy. And Iran claims to have made a modernized version, which they call the Fakur 90. But no one really knows for sure.
It's a reverse-engineered copy.
Reverse-engineered, yeah. I mean,
we can probably say.
Iran obviously acquired a load of
Yeah, but
complex.
remember, this is the same nation that tried to stick an MIM Hawk onto the pylon of an F-14.
Lols. Right, we better do the mighty Sidewinder next. AIM-9. Extensive history and still used. Obviously improved, moldable versions. The versions that we have are the AIM-9L Lima to the AIM-9 Papa. When was this introduced? When was this design shown? I mean, this must have been before Sparrow.
My first AIM-9s actually didn't have fins per se. It just looked like a rod, pretty much, with a seeker head.
The first version we have is the AIM-9B, which is called the GAR-8 in DCS.
Roger, GAR-8. Yeah, so this is old tech then. Right, so when was that? Early 50s?
Its first combat debut was 1958, but they were testing in the mid-50s. It was first used on F-86 Sabres against Chinese MiG-17s, which oddly enough is how the Russians got a hold of it, because one of the warheads impacted into a MiG-17 and failed to detonate. So it flew home with this thing lodged in the side of the airframe.
It's fair to say they didn't have much reliability in the early days then.
Do not worry, comrades. We will find out how Americans do missiles by throwing planes in air. One missile will finally not detonate.
Basically.
So we didn't have them in the Korean War then, but we had them, or was that the end of the Korean War that happened, Jim? Or are we in Vietnam now?
This is 1958, post-Korean War.
Post-Korean War.
It depends on who you ask, because technically the Korean War only ended in 2018.
Yes. Okay, so mainly extensively used in the Vietnam War. What models did we have then? And what was it fired by? And what were the results, I guess?
I believe that AIM-9Bs were still in use during Vietnam.
started out with the F7. The F7 had 4 of them on those interesting pylons you were talking about the other day. On
side body pylons. Yeah.
Yeah, the 9B was actually famously copied by the KGB and mailed a copy to them, and became the AA2 ATOL.
How interesting.
Yes, we just mentioned that actually. So yes, USOF started with the AIM-9B, and the Navy started with the AIM-9... no, they had AIM-9Bs as well, but most of their kills started with AIM-9Ds.
If you go to Wikipedia, Sherman, it's got Vietnam War area, 1965, 1973.
Yes, I'm looking at it now. So yes, they started with the B, moved on to the E, but of course the problem with the B is rear aspect, highly temperamental, and did not perform particularly well at the look-down attitude due to...
Like to lock onto the sun.
Yeah, lock onto the sun. Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about rear aspect only, so that means that you could only fire it if the hostile was moving away from you, so you were behind them.
Yes, so in other words, you can't hit them from the front, which is what informed a lot of initial Fox 1 tactics.
So my understanding is during the kind of 65 to 73 Vietnam era is they were not very reliable and easily dodged and malfunctioned a lot.
In the case of the AIM-9B, ground heat, so just like humidity heat coming off of the jungle, for example, would cause the missile to lose tracks. And combined with the fact that the pilots were not properly trained in the dogfighting parameters of the use of this missile, they had a very unreliable reputation.
Roger. And
that said, the US Navy scored a total of 46 kills and the Air Force 34 kills with Sidewinders.
They didn't like high G maneuvers that much. You had to be pretty much flying.
Yeah, it looks like the latest variants that the Navy used was the Gulf, and the Air Force used the latest variant being the J.
Roger. Okay, so we should say this is obviously a low-range missile, so absolute maximum range, I guess, of around 10 miles, something like that, and a realistic, useful range of 2 to 3 miles. And it's a Fox 2 type missile, so it's a passive infrared homing missile, so it doesn't emit any radiation, it doesn't have a radar, it has its own...
Yes, with one exception, which is the AIM-9C, which was a radar-guided missile, which later became the AGM-122.
Ooh, we're going to talk about that in a minute. Yeah, right, that's interesting. So, yes, it has a passive IR detector, so it detects heat, basically, and so if you fire it, it will detect it will lock onto the heat of the hostile's engine. That was the idea anyway, or the sun, or a buffalo, or anything hot, as it turns out in Vietnam. And that's it, yeah. And the bonus of it, of course, is that you don't have to get radar lock, so you don't even need a radar. You can have a plane without a radar if so you could stick it on anything for self-defense, which is great. And hence loads of planes had this. But also it doesn't give any warning to the hostile, because it doesn't emit any radiation. The hostile can have no kind of radar warning receiver that can detect it's being fired. So that's a bonus.
Your only warning will be seeing the smoke trail.
Right, so we've got the A then at the beginning, then the B, which was used, it looks like, through the Vietnam, and then the C, you say, was radar guided. I wasn't aware of this.
Yeah. So the C was essentially an experimental version, which was meant to be used with the F-8 Crusader fighter. It was equipped with a semi-active receiver for a radar-guided attack.
Did it ever make it into service?
It was specifically for the Crusader, but it doesn't mention whether these were actively used in service, although I suspect not. About 1,000 of these were produced, and they realized they were shit weapons in air combat, so they decided that they would turn them into AGM-122 sidearms instead.
Roger, which has got to use as an anti-radiation ground attack weapon, wasn't
it? It's basically a Sidewinder seed missile.
Roger. Okay, then through the years, we've been developed version on version on version. The AIM-9 Papa 5, I believe, is the first one with all aspect seeking, so it's a heat-seeking missile, but the hostile doesn't have to be facing away from you, it can be facing towards you, and it can still detect that engine heat or friction.
Not quite. So the original AIM Papas were rear aspect missiles. It was the P5, which took some technology from the first infrared that I'm aware of, which was all aspect, the AIM-9 Lima, which was introduced into full production in 1977. It took until the 77 for the Air Force to get hold of all aspect missiles. these were used to shoot down the Su-22 in the first Consider incident.
So which is the later, the Papa 5
And then
or the Lima?
later in the Falkland. Sorry?
Which is the later, the Papa 5 or the Lima?
Papa Lima probably would have been introduced slightly afterwards.
Papa 5, right, understood.
Let me see if I can find the P5 here.
Oh yeah, I get it. I see it. So the P was developed before the L. Sorry, no. Here's the annoying thing: the P is less advanced, but it's after in the alphabet than the Lima and the Mike. And the Lima and the Mike were actually more modern. It's very confusing.
It's kind of like the British numbering system of Spitfires in World War II, isn't it?
So they kind of got to a certain point, then started going backwards. But all right, well I can just describe it roughly off here. So the Papa 5 we think is rear aspect only. The Papa is rear aspect only seeking. The Papa 5 is all aspect seeking, borrowed from the Lima, which is here, which I think is all aspect seeking. And
Yes.
the Mike is, apart from the X, it's the daddy. It's the recent one that'll be used on things like F-15s, F-16s, stuff like that. And modern.
The 22s can only carry the mics at the moment.
Yeah, but that's a problem with the airplane design, not the missile.
Yeah, so the Mike was the basic modern one, if you like, the 90s into the 2000s variant.
So the AIM-9Ms were delivered in 1982.
Roger. So for reasons we don't understand, the Papa and the Papa 5, although they are after L and M in the alphabet, were actually older and we think less capable. Okay. Oh, and we've got the AIM-9X here, guys. So into the future, we will be getting this shortly. Who wants to go through the AIM-9X and what that's all about?
So the AIM-9X has a number of new features. The first thing is it's built to integrate with the first helmet-mounted sight systems that the US uses on planes like the F-16 and the F-18. You can basically look at the target, the seeker head will track it at ridiculous angles off of the bore sight. The AIM-9X also has some additional stuff that allows it to keep tracking, probably digital seeker head. I know it also has thrustering to allow it to do these ridiculous maneuvers off of the plane. You can literally get the aircraft or the missile to turn around and chase an aircraft that just passed you.
Roger.
But the later Block 2 AIM-9Xs have what's lock-on after launch capability, which means you can fire the missile without it being locked onto the target yet. Fire it behind you, it'll turn around, see there's something behind you, and hook onto that.
Interesting.
So you can literally shoot at guys chasing you now.
Sounds good, but also sounds dangerous. So we're gonna have to see how that works out. And just to give you an idea.
So yes, this thing is ridiculously OP.
Yeah, and how expensive these things are. These over $600,000 for an AIM-9X Block 2. So
And this is supposed to be the cheap missile.
cheap missile, yeah, exactly. So they're getting so expensive, this military hardware. Right, well, we haven't got the X in DCS yet, so we can't tell you how good it is, but we will find out in the next few months, hopefully.
All right, the story I was actually referring to with the Sidewinder was actually stolen by Manfred Reminger as a KGB agent in West Germany. He entered an air base and physically stole one from the munition depot, put it by wheelbarrow into his Mercedes and drove it home, disassembled it, and shipped it to Moscow. It cost $79.25.
That's amazing.
Yeah, this was October 22nd, 1967, so I'm assuming this was probably another copy of the B or a later variant just after.
Yeah, I suspect it would have been one of the later variants of which you see. The variant I'm referring to is the AA2 Atoll, which is the one which was basically copied from the one stuck inside of a Chinese 17.
Right, let's move on to the Soviet stuff then, shall we? So why don't we start at the R60. So this is a Fox 2 IR passive homing missile, short range, I guess similar to the AIM-9.
In many ways, it is the equivalent to what I suppose would be the AIM-9 Lima.
Otherwise known as the AA8 Aphid. R60, it looks very different to a Sidewinder. I mean, it's going to be relatively small, roughly the same size, but it's a very different looking thing. Used on a huge amount of platforms, MiG-21, 23, 25, 27, 29.
The AA8 is its Russian designation, I believe. Oh no, sorry, I'm getting it wrong. It's the NATO designation is AA8.
Do we know when this was put into service then, the R60?
1974.
So this is equivalent to a Sidewinder Lima, we think, or thereabouts.
I'm reading here, the R60M only has limited all-aspect capability. I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean.
It's crap, is what it means, Sherman. Yep. So, and we found it's a bit fatter. The body's a bit fatter than Sidewinder, we find, and we find it extremely slow. I mean, we quote the internet as Mach 2.7, and we find if you're chasing someone with it at transonic speed, you need to be within kind of 1.5 miles because it is so slow and unaerodynamic. That's what we find in our simulator anyway. How realistic that is, we can't find out.
So these were used used these to shoot at a Korean airliner. And June 1978, a PVO MiG-23M flown by blah 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 shot down 2 Iranian Boeing Chinook helicopters that trespassed into Soviet airspace. Syria's used them. They were used in Angola by the Cubans against the South African Air Force, and I believe India has used them.
Roger. And the upgraded version, the R60 Mike, known as the Aphid B, all-around improvement, better seek ahead, longer range, longer actual missile, ECM resistance. But still, we don't think very highly of them, do we, Sherman? We think they're a bit hard to use, and they never hit anything.
Well, except airliners, apparently.
Except airliners. So that leads us directly onto the R73. Now, this is the polar opposite. This is the big daddy of close-range, heat-seeking, passive IR homing missiles.
Entered service in 1984.
1994, so known as the Archer, absolutely lethal. I think it looks fairly similar to the R60, and the range is still low and the speed is still low, Mach 2.5. The range, realistically, when you're actually using it, probably kind of 2, 3, maybe 4 miles if you're lucky. But in reality, in our simulator, we find it absolutely menacing. It can turn so wonderfully.
Yes, and in real life, the concept of this thing was terrifying to the West because it was the ultimate dogfighting missile in that it worked with Russian helmet-mounted sights, and this thing had seeker heads which could track up to 40 degrees off missile center line.
Yeah, that's absolutely massive, and they can be used and guided by helmet-mounted displays. Now, think how ahead the Russians are at this point. We're talking, early 80s, late 70s. They were firing these things from helmet-mounted display as helmet-mounted sights. And basically, the West is only really doing that now with AIM-9Xs, isn't it? Like 40 years later. Absolutely crazy how far ahead where they were.
Well, yeah. So the Russians were the first big superpower to do it. The South Africans had experimental sights in their Mirage F1 CZs, but nothing like as big as obviously the Soviet Union, which was full-scale fielding these things.
Mm-hmm. And when we've used these in dogfights, it gives you such a huge advantage to have, say, a flanker or a MiG-29 or whatever with a helmet-mounted sight and one of these off-bore sight firing R-73s with huge turning capacity compared to the contemporary F-15, which is basically stuck in a bore-sighted aiming type mode. It's a massive advantage, and it's going to lead to
so you're either hooked to the bore sight or to the radar, and having the ability to essentially track with your head makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, and in our simulator, at least, this missile is a lot more manoeuvrable than the contemporary Sidewinder, we find. So it's a real beastie. The only saving grace slightly is that with the R-73, it is a smoke propellant, so you can see the white smoke that it leaves. It gives you a chance, at least, whereas a Sidewinder is smokeless propellant. But yeah, that's a real piece of kit. Right, so that is that. Let's move on now, shall we, to the R-27. Massively widely used missile, essentially in we get all sorts of variants. You can see in R27 ER, ET, RT. The T variant means that it's electro-optically guided or passive infrared homing, and I mean to Fox 2 or Fox 2 long as we call it, because it's actually a medium range missile rather than a short range missile. The R is a semi-active radar guided missile, so the R27R could be considered an equivalent of a modern Sparrow, I guess you'd say. That.
Yes, so the R27 codename Alamo is equivalent to the AIM-7 Sparrow, sort of like the 80s onwards, and has had several combat uses. For example, this was uses in Yemen, the war in Donbass, the Saudi-led intervention in Yemen, and the Eritrean and Ethiopian war, which I didn't even know was a thing.
And if you're wondering why there's an R and a T and then an ER and a T, the E is an extended range version, basically. I guess the missile is a little bit longer, more propellant, or maybe more aerodynamic, I'm not sure. But that's what that is.
Basically, just modernized.
Yep, modernised. Fast missile, so Mach 4.5, slightly faster than the Sparrow. It does have a long range, semi-active guided like the Sparrow. The range, again, we can't really accept the range as fully accurate, but it shows about 70 miles for an extended range version, so that's pretty amazing, really. Well, it's similar to the AIM 120. They say about 60 miles, depending on which website you look, so 70 miles, slightly more than the AMRAAM, and that's shown in our DCS World Simulator. It's about 10% longer range than our AIM 120 equivalent.
Interesting detail here, particularly about Ethiopia and the Eritrean War in 1999. Eritrea had MiG-29s, Ethiopia had Su-27s, both piloted Russian mercenaries. It looks the hit ratio of the R-27 was only 4% during the conflict.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of leads me on to my point. I found it extremely difficult to dodge. I found it extremely easy to dodge one of these R-27 missiles. I don't know if they're just they don't follow the radar beam very well, or if they're just not very aerodynamic. I don't know, but I find them very easy to dodge. Launching platforms, planes such as flanker variants, the MiG-29. I think that's possibly about it. I don't think the Foxbat ever used it.
MiG-23 also would have been able to use them. I think later MiG-21s as well.
So the R is the semi-active radar guiding variant. We also have the E, which is the T, which is the interesting one. The T was the infrared one. So just like the Sidewinder up here of the NATO, or the R60 or the R73, it's passive IR guiding. So basically the only things that would fire this missile would be, for instance, a flanker, which has a large IR sensor on its nose, or a MiG-29 had the same thing. The MiG-20, actually, that's all I know that had it. I know some other things probably did have it. And they could essentially IR lock planes at a very long range. So a Sidewinder could only lock a plane at short range, because its IR sensor was relatively small, but the large IR sensor on the mothership could lock aircraft, kind of 30 miles away, pass the information to the T missile, which is, I like to think, as basically a massive Sidewinder, and then that could go and seek off, find that ship and shoot it down. And because it's passive,
sort of a hybrid thing. So in DCS, what you can do is you can use either the electrical optical sensor or the radar to do the initial guidance, and once it's hit terminal phase, then the passive seeker on the actual missile will take effect.
Oh, I didn't know that. So the mothership guides it then with its own IR sensor, with its big IR sensor, until a certain point, a pit bull or whatever you want to call it, and then it uses its own sensor when it's happy to use its own sensor, I guess. Then that's interesting.
Yeah. So they were that's the same concept behind the AIM-7R, never service.
Roger. Okay, so that is interesting. And of course, the big benefit of passive systems like that, passive IR systems, they don't emit any radiation, they accept only, and so they don't give any warning to the fighter that's being shot at, or whatever that's been shot at, that you've got this bloody great missile hurtling towards you, and it's an absolute killer. If I'm in an F-15 and I'm getting shot by an R-27 ET, I've got absolutely no warning. The only warning I can get is the godsend that it uses a smoked propellant, so it does leave a smoke trail, so as long as you've got good visibility, you can see it. Otherwise, it's absolutely deadly, and we don't really have anything like it in the American camp. So it's a real game changer.
This is why you have wingmen.
Roger. Right, anything on the R-27 before we sign off that?
Apparently, it is actually usable on the Su-57, the latest Russian fighter.
What's that, the PACFAR or...
The PACFAR, yes.
Yeah, it'd be kind of weird if it wasn't really, wouldn't it? It's this missile's here to stay. It's a really good missile.
It is, but it means they're still using it, basically.
Roger. Okay, so that'll do for that. Next, we've got the R-77, the Russian Adder. Absolutely menacing missile. So this is what I would call the equivalent of the US's AMRAAM Fox 3. Would you agree with that?
Yes, there are several modernized and export variants of this missile. As said earlier, the variant we have in DCS has sort of like these gated, or these like metal grates, which are the rear tail fins, where some of the more modern ones use more standard fin configurations.
Roger that. So again, it's a Fox 3 type fully active missile, so it's got its own onboard radar, so you'll fire it from your mothership either with a full bore SCT lock or a track while scan. It'll seek at a pre-designated point, it will go pitbull, turn its own radar on and seek the hostile from there, at which point your mothership can turn around, fly away, and this adder will carry on to the target. So like an AMRAAM, we find it slightly less range than the AMRAAM. I see quoted here 55 miles. We found it about 10% range less than the AIM-120C in combat in our simulator DCS world. And it's going to be fired from an awful lot of stuff. MiG-23, 25, 27, 29, 31, and the whole flanker series basically. So
it is worth noting that the original R-77 is listed as an operational range of 80 kilometers. It looks like the modernization version 1 has 110 kilometer range, and K-77, which seems to be much more modern, appears to have 193 kilometer range.
Roger, it sounds like we get the early one, the 70 or 75, whatever that was. That's late 80s, early 90s version we get with the fence back. Okay, yep, so pretty menacing. In our simulator, the J-11A can fire it, which is a Russian flanker essentially, and the MiG-29 Sierra can fire it. So at least the early planes can't fire it like the flank array, so at least we don't have to worry about that.
The downside of the DCS aircraft, like the J-11 using the fast is that their missiles, their radars essentially aren't really designed for track while scan use, so you can early really lock and shoot up on the target.
Yeah, I've tried that out and I'd agree with that. Otherwise roughly equivalent to the AMRAAM, slightly less range, Mach 4 capable. And that's about it, really. Anything to add to the 77 Adder?
It's the closest thing to the AMRAAM apart from the French Mica that we see today.
Hey, fam. Cool, that'll do. Again, there's a whole load of variants of this. All the missiles we've talked about, there are numerous variants.
So, ladies and gentlemen, the R-33.
Right, I know Jack Squat. Well, that would be lovely, Sherman, if your voice wasn't continuously breaking up. Right, the AA-9, so named as the Amos. What do you know about it? All I know is Foxbats fired it or something like that, but what do you know about it and its long range?
This thing is essentially in pure intercessor. It's also semi-active, so it is basically an AIM-54 Phoenix made in Russia.
Well, you say that, but an AIM-54 is fully active Fox 3, so you're saying this is a Fox 1?
So is this one.
Oh, so it is fully active, you're saying, yeah? Wow,
yeah,
what a beast.
It uses the same principle. Initial semi-active radar homing, followed by terminal active radar homing.
Roger, yeah, so just like an AIM-54 then. I'm guessing it's going to have a big range of over 70 miles, I imagine?
The 1981, 120 kilometers. 2012, 304 kilometers.
For 304 kilometers, yeah, right, so that is an awful lot. So there are various variants, as you can imagine. We get the R-33, in fact that's all we get, the base version basically, so that'd be the 80s version, and that will be fired by MiG-31 Foxhound. MiG-31 will be the one that fired it. As far as I know, there have been no actual active firings against hostiles.
Well, yes, typically they have not needed to.
So for the variant that we get, the base version, Mach 4.5, so slightly slower than the Phoenix and slightly less range, but essentially otherwise very similar.
The Mica is a French fully active missile which replaces the Super.
Who fires it then?
French planes typically, so Rafales and Mirage 2000-5s.
So is this the one that we call the French equivalent of the AMRAAM then?
Yes. Basically, it's same principle, except the French are very territorial about their weapons.
Yeah, affirm to that. Operational range. So it says here for up to 50 kilometers, 30 miles. I mean, that's pretty low for a maximum range. But again, I guess it just depends how it's measured. Mm-hmm. It looks a bit like the Super to me. So it
is the successor to the Super missile.
Right. So if you so the Super is equivalent to, if you like, the Sparrow Fox 1. So then the Mica or Mica is equivalent to the Fox 3 style of AMRAAM. Okay, and it's going to be used on the later Mirage 2000s, and the Raffle. That's all I can think of.
They obviously are of limited use because America isn't too keen on them competing with AMRAAMs.
Roger. So then we've got the Matra Super 530D. So this is French's equivalent to the Sparrow. Would that be fair?
Yes.
So semi-active homing, Fox 1 style missile. Operational range officially 37 kilometers. So what's that, kind of 22 miles? So it's a fair amount less than its contemporaries, and we do find it about 80% range of an AIM-120C actually in combat, maybe even a little bit less than that. Although we do find them highly manoeuvrable, hard to dodge.
It's worth noting that the variant currently available with the Mirage 2000 is the Super D, which is the latest variant.
I know the Israelis didn't like them that much. They always went to guns because they were primarily, that's what they were trained at.
Roger. That's the Israelis.
The main reason was, I don't know what the main reason was, but I recall Israeli pilots complaining about the missiles. They'd actually nicknamed them Bidon, which is Hebrew for drop tank.
Lols. Right, yeah, fair enough. Okay, Mach 4.5, equivalent to the Sparrow, and used, at least in our simulator, from the Mirage 2000. Okay, and finally we have the Matra Magic 2. So again, a French, what would you say, equivalent of a Sidewinder, I suppose?
Yes, they are effectively, Magic 2 in 1986 is something equivalent to an AIM-9M or L. The Magic 1 is a 1975 missile, and it was fairly shit.
Roger.
Operational history here. October 1996, 7 months after the escalation of Kardak, Greek Mirage 2000 fired Magic 2, shot down a Turkish F-16 over the Aegean Sea. There were further instances of combat in 2012, apparently. I know South Africa used the Magic 1, and there were frequent complaints of these things flying up the tailpipes of enemy fighters and not doing any damage.
Roger, yeah. Obviously short range, officially I think 15 kilometers, but in reality, in some kind of fight 2 or 3 miles, you'd expect, used by Mirage 2000, Sea Harrier, I didn't know that. Raffle in modern day, also some older Super 10 Dart, and Mirage F1, Mirage 5, and Mirage 3. So, yep.
A Super 10 Dart would be nice.
The Magic's the one with the 8 fins in the front, right?
Roger, I don't know why, but yeah, extra maneuverability, I guess. Okay, guys, thank you for that. I hope you've enjoyed that. Again, it's not all of the missiles that we get, and certainly not all in the world. There must be hundreds of them in the whole world. But I hope that was useful, and you enjoyed it. Otherwise, we will see you later.